You're live.
Good morning, everyone. This is the August 3rd, 2021 Path and Trails Subcommittee meeting. Welcome to the Path and Trails Subcommittee remote public hearing. The city encourages your interest and participation in the public hearing process. The Path and Trails Subcommittee is an advisory board to the Transportation Commission. The Path and Trails Subcommittee of the Transportation Commission is hereby established to advise the commission as a whole and to provide a public forum for issues surrounding paths and trails. Until further notice, Path and Trails Subcommittee meetings are being held electronically. While physical facilities are not open to the public, Path and Trails Subcommittee meetings are available on Scottsdale's YouTube channel to allow the public to virtually attend and view the meeting in progress. Citizens wishing to comment or speak on any agenda action item must have submitted public comments or request to speak from no later than 90 minutes prior to the start of the meeting. Citizen comments will not otherwise be taken during the meeting, but the public is encouraged to submit written comments after the meeting on any matters that happen during this meeting. Citizens that have already submitted a request to speak form are allotted 3 minutes to speak when called upon during the public comment period of the action item. Please mute your devices while you are live in the meeting and speaking to help eliminate audio feedback. Begin by stating your name and your address for record and then proceed with your comment. Those remotely attending this meeting shall observe the same rules of order and decorum as if they were physically in attendance at City Hall. Thank you for your interest and time. We will now begin the meeting with a roll call. Roll call.
Thank you. Chair Anderson.
Present.
Thank you. Subcommittee Member Davis.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Law is absent. Subcommittee Member Levy.
I'm here.
Thank you. And Commissioner Qualley, she is also absent.
Thank you. Is there any public comment?
There is none.
Okay, we'll move on to the first item of the agenda.
And just to let everyone know, for the minutes, I had to make some adjustments from the June 1st meeting related to Commissioner Qualley was not yet appointed to this group, so she's shown as a guest, but there may be questions when you look at how we held the meeting.
Okay. I didn't see that in the minutes that were.
I just made adjustments to it since that meant she wouldn't be able to vote, but she had abstained anyway, so
Okay.
I just made those changes.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on to the.
But if anyone has changes, let me know. Otherwise, we'll approve the minutes.
I do have one change. This
Okay.
is the Vice Chair. This is Chair Anderson. On page 3, item 4, paragraph 6, says Commissioner Law said he was surprised to see no documented benefits. Mr. Gunn-Pauli clarified that as these are no installations, I think that should be new installations.
That these are new. I think you are correct.
Yeah.
So we can change that.
That's the only one I had.
Okay. Anyone else?
If nobody else has any comments or corrections, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
This is Subcommittee Member Davis. So moved.
Do we have a second?
This is Subcommittee Member Levy, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'll call for a vote, roll call vote.
Okay. Chair Anderson.
Yes.
Thank you. Subcommittee Member Davis.
Yes.
Thank you. Subcommittee Member Levy.
Yes.
All right. Motion passed.
Okay. Moving on to item number 2. the Transportation Action Plan, also known as TAP. Susan, are you going to be giving this one?
Greg and I will be presenting. So let me just get this
Okay.
pulled up.
Just for members of the board, of the committee, and for the public, this is an important item. The Transportation Commission is going through special meetings, honing through this new Transportation Action Plan, hopefully by September, to make final recommendations to the council for this plan, which is basically the blueprint for the next few years on how the city is proceeding with the transportation item. So it's a very important item, and appreciate any input the committee can give us. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, everyone can see my cover slide. So yes, since March, we have been working on different components for the Transportation Action Plan and holding the special meetings with the Transportation Commission. But we wanted to bring bike pedestrian related items to you today. So what we're really focusing on is refinement of the existing transportation system as opposed to adding extensive new infrastructure. Notably, if this new infrastructure would be difficult to implement at a reasonable cost, we would prefer to focus on being able to do more improvements and maintenance. And then our focus is also on livable streets and community over rapid traffic throughput. Thank you. So multimodal. For the streets element, we are proposing several reductions in our street classifications through the draft Transportation Action Plan. And this is due to long-term traffic volume trends and 2040 travel demand forecasts. So we do have some of the locations listed, but it's important to look at what's changing by type. So we've got some major arterial to minor arterial proposed changes. The couplets, Goldwater and Drinkwater Boulevard, we're proposing changing those to minor arterial, and then some minor arterial to minor collector changes, which does affect the number of travel lanes to better utilize that space for all the other modes. So these either allow us to add complete street options with new bike lanes or enhance those that are already there. But for Hayden Road, from McKellips at the city boundary with Tempe up to Indian School Road, this would change from a major arterial with 6 travel lanes to a minor arterial with 4 travel lanes. And this roadway has older, narrow sidewalks attached to the back of curb, no bike lanes. There is pretty busy bus service that is along this corridor. So making this into a complete street really would work better for people. And in this section that you can see here, there's no raised medians. So it could be tempting to go very fast on a wide street like this when someone's driving, but it would look a lot like what we see on sections of Indian School from Drinkwater to Pima Road, and those work really well for all modes. The Goldwater and Drinkwater Boulevard couplet system, that is 5 travel lanes that would change to a minor arterial of 4 travel lanes. And this would also allow for complete street options in Old Town. And we have had feedback from bicyclists that there's not that many north-south options when riding a bike, either to or through Old Town. So this would help a lot with that. And they're just really not carrying the traffic that back in the 80s this system was designed for. So I think it's important to look at how people are using the network now and make adjustments for that. Potential changes to street classification from the major collector with 4 travel lanes to minor collector with 2 travel lanes. There's a list here. We won't look at all of these on the map, but it's important to look at how these would improve cycling and pedestrian comfort. So if we have a street that doesn't have bike lanes, this gives us the opportunity to add them. If it's a street that already has bike lanes, we could add a painted buffer. And then either of those options add a lot of distance between pedestrians and the vehicles in the travel lane. So it does make it better for people walking and biking. And so we are really looking at the long-term traffic volumes on these, and that's our methodology for these proposed changes. And some visual examples that are pretty recent. There's a couple ways that we're focusing on these. The first would be the paint diet, which would be coordinated with pavement treatment during maintenance. That's where we can really add the buffered bike lanes. On the left, you can see what 124th Street looked like before the paving treatment. And then on the right, you can see how that looked. And in this image, we had enough space to make a very wide painted buffer between the bike lane and the travel lane. And then the other option is, with a road diet, that's moving the curbs inward and narrowing that space of pavement. A great example for this is 96th Street, what it used to look like on the left several years ago, and what it looks like now as a minor collector. And that space works very well for that neighborhood. And it's a good route with bike lanes and separated sidewalks and landscaped medians. I won't go into all of these locations here on the map, but just glancing at it, the red line, this shows you almost the farthest north end of the Indian Bend Wash Path, just before it crosses the Central Arizona Project Canal and terminates right now in the Westworld area, but there's plans to extend that much farther north. And then the dotted red line shows the planned CAP path that will be on south of the canal, and that's a regional planned path in the valley. And so this does, some of these yellow routes that you see here already have bike lanes, but it would really improve things in this area where right now you've got the canal on the north, you've got the Loop 101 to the west, and we would like to remove as many barriers to bicycling as possible and still have traffic needs met. These examples or these maps of the major collector to minor collector also show you up in that north central area of Scottsdale. So 96th Street from Shea to Via Linda would not need the lanes that we've got, but you can see what's there now in that top photo. Wouldn't need those 4 lanes. And then 130th and 132nd Street, I believe that's near Mayo, if I'm remembering it correctly, but that has bike lanes, but could benefit from the proposed changes as well. Legend Trail Parkway, way north Scottsdale off Pima. This is an area that does have bike lanes, but it's got limited sidewalk. So again, if we can improve things in this area to not need to utilize those 4 lanes for traffic, and we can repurpose that to have a better condition for biking and walking for the amount of traffic that it carries, then that would be better. McCormick Parkway, this is one where Dave would probably add to the conditions right now on the traffic. He's out in that area quite a bit, and with the 4 lanes that are on this street, he can sometimes ride through there and not see any traffic. So it's not needed to have those 4 lanes for the way that neighborhood functions from Scottsdale to Hayden. Another proposed change is to have minor collectors remain as minor collectors, but to remove the center turn lane. And we've done this in a few locations already with our pavement maintenance schedule and had great feedback. So again, this gives us that chance to either add a new bike lane or add buffered space to existing bike lanes. But by doing this, we would be adding, let me see, here's the rest of the list. it would add about 50 miles of bike lanes on this network. And this is a great way to create the neighborhood bikeways that we are proposing as our newer classification for our bikeway network. So this just gives you kind of a look at the distribution of what these proposed locations, what areas they would serve. And a great thing about this is it can help get people more comfortable with biking within their neighborhoods and connect them to the rest of the network, as well as get help bring bicyclists to be more visible to the drivers as well, since it would add so many miles. So I forgot to mention at the beginning, we'll have discussion after each one of these sections before we move on to the next one. So let me know if you have comments or if I need to go back to go back to any of the slides. And it's like
I see. Anybody else have a hand up?
it looks like there's two, but
Yeah,
let me see if I can see.
I have my hand up, but let's see who else has their hand up.
Like Subcommittee Member Davis.
Right.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, should I lead off?
We can hear you now.
Okay, great. Yeah, so this is Subcommittee Member Davis. So Susan, and I'm sure that the paint diet option is probably significantly less expensive than the road diet when you're moving curbs. Can you offer some just explanation of when you would use the road diet where you're doing a full complete street overhaul versus just the restriping?
Thank you. Well, we try to coordinate as we always do this, not just in our proposed changes, but we try to coordinate as much as we can with the street operations maintenance program. So if they're planning to go out to a location in the next, year or so to do their maintenance, we would try to integrate our project with theirs at that same time. If it's something that they won't be improving for several years, then we look at either working through the CIP if we feel like it's needed for a major change in the road with that road diet option, or even if we need to just do a paint diet outside of pavement maintenance. But anything that goes through the CIP program, all those projects get scored and prioritized. So it could be harder to get several road diets programmed into the CIP. And our transportation action plan is really looking at the next 10 years compared to the previous transportation master plan updates. Those looked farther out and more long range, but this is why we're calling it the action plan, to look at what we can really do in the next 10 years. And then Dave, if you could add more.
Chair Davis, Chair Anderson, Subcommittee Member Davis. The proposal that we have put into the draft of the Transportation Action Plan for when we would consider a road diet as opposed to a paint diet is when the remaining travel lanes are still have enough capacity to be able to add some growth in travel demand. Basically, what we've suggested is that if the two travel lanes can are not handling more than 75% of what you'd expect a two-lane roadway to carry, then we would consider the road diet. But as you say, it is certainly much more expensive, can be well over $1 million per mile at the end of the day. But we have kind of come up with some standards where if we still got roughly 25% of excess capacity with if you had a 4-lane and you reduced it to 2 lanes, that's when we would, if it's below that level, then that's the corridors that we would most likely focus on for road diets as opposed to paint diets when funds are available, if they become available. Thank you.
Thank you.
Subcommittee Davis, your hand's back up, or?
Let me just lower that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Susan, I have a couple questions. This is
Okay.
Chair Anderson.
Thank you.
The statement or the definition of the tag, livable streets. Can you give us a definition of what a livable street is? Because I hear that a lot around, and there's not a lot of people that really understand what that means.
Okay, thank you for your question. We typically use complete streets as a term as well. And if Dave wants to expand, but complete streets are for all modes, and then livability really looks into quality of life for people. But Dave, if you have more to add.
Chair Anderson, the livable streets or livable communities are, as well as complete streets, focus on the concept that I can be very comfortable using that corridor under any mode, that I don't feel as if the roadway is a barrier to my community. It is part of my neighborhood. It's part of my neighborhood, and that I don't feel unsafe using that corridor. So that's where speed becomes a big issue on perceptions of safety. So that's why we are looking at options to, over time, to reduce the number of travel lanes on corridors that were overbuilt based on previous land use plans and projections, and having no McDowell or preserve. But it's really that the streets don't feel as if they are cutting off communities, or if you're on one side of a street versus another, you feel like that's a different neighborhood. So there's some squishiness to that, there's no doubt, but it just gets to that idea that the streets are part of your neighborhood, not a barrier to your neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Another question, maybe for Dave. On minor collector streets where we talked about, that have a center turn lane, and we're eliminating the center turn lane to add protected bike paths on the side. Is there any consideration for speed limits when you do that, as opposed to where you have potentially people turning across or stopping to make a left turn in that single travel lane now?
Chair Anderson, good question. And that is part of what we look at. It's the volume and the character of the street. If it is a street that is providing access to, with maybe limited opportunities for turning into neighborhoods, that comes into play. The streets that we're looking at this being used on are primarily 30-mile-an-hour or 25-mile-an-hour streets, but speed and volume are the criteria that we're looking at, and working with the traffic engineering staff on determining the locations where removing the center turn lane can make sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I see no Dave's hands up. Anybody else have any questions? I don't see any additional hands up other than Dave's is still up.
Okay.
Okay, if there's no more questions, we'll move on to the next section. Thank you.
All right. I'll get the next one pulled up. This one. So I just have a few slides on paths, and then Greg will speak on trails. So we are proposing making some changes to the path system. So these include adding to our planned network, and that also includes things that could be a side path, which would be in some cases attached to the curb, or wider than a sidewalk, but not as wide as a shared use path, like regular 10 feet. Additions to our existing network. Again, some areas that were maybe looked at in the past as sidewalk, we can convert those in our mapping to side paths. That's quite a bit of mileage adding. And then we are deleting some from the planned network. Usually this is because it would be very high cost to add these. The constructability just isn't reasonable, maybe due to terrain and what's there. biggest challenge that we deal with is existing right-of-way or easements available. If everything's developed in that area and we don't have any upcoming future development where we could require dedication of right-of-way or easements for this use, it just doesn't look like we'll be able to build them. And then proximity to other options. So if we have other infrastructure like sidewalks, trails, other bike lanes and things, we may be able to remove those planned paths. So this net change, when you go through all of this, is proposed about 12 miles change in the network. And we'll go by area here. And keep in mind that as we continue drafting the plan, some of these lines may change, and then even the way our maps look once we get to the finished draft or final draft of the TAP, our maps will be more consistent in how they look with the background. So you might see some differences in the meantime. This is by area, up in the north area near Bell Road, Frank Lloyd Wright, and CAP Canal. This shows you the differences in what we are adding with green, adding to the existing additions in planned, and then the removals. And I believe, Greg, you could clarify for me, but when we call something a side path in our network, will it show as the same color as regular shared use path? Or I can't recall if we were going to show a different.
Well, good
symbol
morning,
for
Chair
that.
Anderson, the members of the subcommittee. This is Greg Davies, Senior Transportation Planner of the City of Scottsdale. As you can see in this map, each path or each shared use path is a line. Now, in the GIS system, which is our geographic information system, we can assign attributes to that, like a side path. And that's what I did. I assigned an attribute of a side path. I can make it the same color. It is part of the path system. It is just, we call it a side path instead of a shared use path, which has an attribute that's, the width is usually 10. It can go up to 12 feet. So that's the differentiation. Side paths right now in our system are predominantly 8 feet wide. And so that kind of explains what a side path is to a shared use path.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Dave, go ahead.
I could just add on to that, again, a side path in many cases also basically serves as sidewalk along our major collector and arterial streets. Those are typically built to 8 feet wide. And some of the corridors that we're looking at, we have continuous sidewalks slash side paths that are 8 feet wide. 8 feet is our minimum as for a path in our system. So the thought is that it'd be better to start to identify some of those and map them so people understand that some of these corridors where they may think paths don't exist, there really is a reasonable option. And that's why we've decided to add in some sections of what we refer to as side paths. They are, for the most part, infrastructure that's already in place or in roadways farther to the north will be constructed over time. And they do provide a good option for folks who don't want to ride on the street. And we just want to make sure that as we go forward, we're doing a better job of documenting where those facilities are available for people. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to the farther north area, there's fewer segments that we're proposing changing. But it's important to know that in those neighborhoods farther north, there aren't a lot of sidewalks within neighborhoods all of the time. And the network just isn't as developed yet for biking and walking.
Yeah, so
Oh, and then
this is Greg Davies. As you see on this slide here, you'll see those two red lines and they're kind of at a slanted position. Those actually are in a wash, which is the Riata wash. And so it's just not conducive to build a path, a concrete path within the wash system, even though there's a master drainage plan going on. And it's a possibility to do it on the bank, but in this case, we did remove those in respect to the drainage plan that's being undertaken at this point in time.
Dave Meinhardt, let me just add a little, so you got the right letter to start on that, Greg, but this is actually the rawhide wash corridor.
Rawhide, yeah.
And the drainage flood control improvement that's going to be on is creating continuous flood walls along this corridor. So there is no levee system to put a path on up on the bank. And as Greg mentioned, with it being a wash bottom, this is a natural wash. So it's full of sediment and other things. So it just isn't conducive to creating a path that could ever be used on a regular basis because of maintenance issues, and also the fact that you really don't want to create a path where folks could get trapped in the event that there were any flood flows coming down the wash. So that is why we felt it would be appropriate to remove this from the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I know this one, because that's always at the north end of every map I look at, but this farthest north line, the reason we've removed this one is that's private up in Desert Mountain. It does exist, but that's private for that community, and we don't display those on our public network map. We still track what we know exists in some of the other neighborhoods like that. I know DC Ranch has private and public paths, but that's why you would see that removed off of there. And then for some reason thought I had, but maybe I skipped over it earlier, but we do have in our neighborhood bikeways planned network. That includes, that's not on your slides, I don't remember, but I apologize if I missed it earlier or I just didn't include it.
Susan, this is Dave. You've got it broken into two pieces, and the intention was to see if the committee had any concerns on or comments on the path before we moved on.
Thank you. So we'll just have discussion now on the planned changes to the path network.
Yeah.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Oh, yes, this is Subcommittee Member Davis. I have a few questions, Susan. So I'll just rattle through them. The first question, in the previous version of the transportation, I guess the current transportation master plan, these kind of side paths had a priority ranking assigned to them. Are we continuing with the use of a priority system for the transportation action plan, or will all pathway additions be well, I guess all side path additions be kind of lumped together with just one priority, which is below the cap and the IBW and the Arizona canals?
Thank you for your question, Subcommittee Member Davis. So on that, the previous plans did have that tier 1, 2, 3 ranking to help staff with prioritizing. We're looking a little different now with, we've got primary paths that we're focusing on that are, as you said, the CAP path, Indian Bend Wash path, and then the Crosscut and Arizona Canal paths, those are really built out, but those are really framing more of our spine to the network. And we would like to prioritize those more before we focus on the rest of the network. But Dave may have more to add on what we would do with the rest of the planned network.
Yes, Subcommittee Member Davis, Chair Anderson. When it comes to side paths that have not yet been constructed, what we'll be looking at is priorities on filling in gaps, improving connections to regional systems, ability to leverage development contributions or potentially federal grants. We are working on a separate element or section to the TAP that is called the implementation program, and within that we're going to be talking about that with the Transportation Commission actually tomorrow evening. And there are a set of priority factors that will be used to identify. We're not going to the level at this point of taking every single segment and saying it's a 1, 2, or 3, but rather characterizing priorities first on how we invest our limited resources, and then secondly, when we when we have identified projects, that we would have a set of factors that we'd use to prioritize those connections. Now, citizen involvement is obviously part of that as well, but we're not taking that step of giving a 1, 2, or 3 level to each segment, but using a lot of good ideas and factors that would be used to determine which ones would make the most sense to invest our limited resources in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then I think I have 4 total questions or comments. The second question is, so I do appreciate the fact that we are starting to identify a lot of our previously built infrastructure as side paths, because I've done quite a bit of exploration of the system, and I noticed on a lot of our either major collector or whatnot that we seem to have those wide sidewalks, side paths already built. Are there any plans to stripe sidewalks that we consider to be side paths? And the reason I ask, one example that comes to mind is the path along Indian Bend Road between Hayden and Scottsdale is striped. And I think it really helps a rider to be able to understand that not only are major path systems like on the wash or the canals, that those are paths, but certain sidewalks are also considered paths. And I would love to be able to see a striping plan implemented to better help identify those. Is that something that's been considered?
And Subcommittee Member Dave Meinhardt. Yeah, we are going to continue to look at striping more of our side path sections. Indian Bend in particular was part of a former path alternative that had a different route that we had to adjust to make it more functional and accessible to folks. We've done the same thing on Cactus Road east of 96th Street, and we will continue to do that. The intention right now is that we probably won't be striping every side path, but we will, at least where we don't stripe, start to look at some signage that would show as a bike route. Mainly that the amount of striping does fade, and it does, the inventory does start to get overwhelming over time. But an example of a corridor that we are certainly going to look at striping would be in the Shea Boulevard, where we don't have opportunities to even put bike lanes on the roadway. But there will be other corridors as well. So the idea is that if we think it's a kind of more of a regional level side path, that we would add striping. If it's a little bit more of a localized corridor, those would be ones that we would focus more on signage. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess there's 2 questions, 2 comments. So the first comment, so I was doing a comparison of the shown or the proposed, plan and existing path system compared to what was in the transportation master plan. A lot of lines, a lot of colors to cross connect. I did notice 2 high priority paths that were in the southern part of the system that didn't seem to be shown and weren't being proposed as deletions. So I think these are just kind of like were never included in the GIS. So one of those is an extension of the path along Indian Bend Road between Hayden and Pima. Was flagged to have a high priority path back in the transportation master plan. So I'd love for that to be included in our update. And then this kind of ties into the work Greg's doing on the Osborne Complete Street. There was also supposed to be a high priority path on Osborne between Hayden and Scottsdale, which I think is also not shown in this update. So I guess I would propose either, incorporating those so we have them noted, or hopefully not deleting them.
Can you repeat your first one? You said Indian Bend Road. Did you say Hayden to Pima?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the intent of that is just an extension of that existing one.
Yeah, we can double check. I don't believe we removed those off of planned, but we can verify that.
Okay. And then my final comment, I noticed, so I kind of looked at the list of the proposed deletions, and I generally agree with all of them. I certainly can't fault us for removing something if there's a good opportunity, within a quarter mile away, or to Dave's point, you can't build a path in the bottom of a wash. I certainly get that. One path that was deleted or is being proposed for deletion, which I was sorry to see, is the continuing of our path up Pima, following the alignment of the 101. And I've sent some emails about this in the past and asked, and Dave gave a really good explanation of why that's going to be very tricky, or why we may consider deleting it. I think the biggest sticking point was the cost of doing grade separated crossings at some of the major intersections. I know ADOT's doing the 101 expansion right now, which seems like a great time for us to have get some right of way put in for a future path. I would, even though I understand it would cost a lot of money, I'm kind of opposed to removing that plan, simply because I think it would be, such a fantastic north-south corridor for our citizens to use. Even if inclusion of it becomes aspirational, I guess so be it. But I would be in favor of retaining that 101 alignment, just so it doesn't fall off our radar. Maybe it would become a good opportunity for a potential bond project down the road if the cost is deemed to be extravagant.
Thank you. I know for that one, a really big challenge we've had is having the right of way or easements in place, and then having that planned segment would still be a barrier for anybody east of there. So we've looked at the neighborhood routes on either side of the freeway to be the nearby alternatives, which would be, I believe, 84th as well as 90th, 92nd. But if Dave has more to add on the reasons why this just wasn't feasible to keep, other than the crossings and the available right of way.
Yeah, Chair Anderson, Subcommittee Davis, this is one that we looked at several times over the years. And because number one, the freeway widening is all happening within the existing footprint of ADOT's right of way. They're not going to be acquiring any additional right of way as they do that widening, just so that's understood. But the challenge of trying to do grade separated crossings at Shea Boulevard, Cactus Road, more of a minor one at Thunderbird Road, and then continuing north, we follow this all the way up across the CAP Canal. It is daunting, to say the least. It's beyond aspirational, in my personal opinion, as a professional planner. And then you also have things such as the state land that is sold along the south side of the 101 freeway, and other plans that are in place. There's the value of that land is such that they really don't want to separate out the bike system from the roadway system. So it'd be more of a side path type of a situation. But the challenges on that one are enormous versus, in my opinion, the benefit that you get. I understand that it's a nice connection. I personally live near where the path was constructed between the green belt and up to Shea Boulevard. Because of the limited access that's available along those core, especially between Mountain View Road and Shea Boulevard, that path gets almost no usage. And that's another concern that we'd have, is this path were to continue to the north. The only access, we'd only have an access point at the Sweetwater Bridge crossing, and then other than that, at the mile roadways, which, while it does provide some regional connectivity, it is going to always be, in my opinion, as a planner and an avid cyclist, a limited use facility, because there are so few points you can get to it. And that alone steers some people away because they're afraid of being trapped in there. But it's not, we don't give up anything lightly when it comes to our bike network. But as an action plan that we're developing, again, as Susan said, we're looking 5 to 10 years out. Certainly, there's nothing that's being done in that area that would make it impossible to do it, but I would not recommend it as part of an action plan that looks at what is realistically feasible over the next 5 to 10 years. Thank you.
Thank
Oh.
you.
Thanks very much, really, for the thorough explanation, Dave. So in the future, because I'm sure the interval for updating this is probably the action plans. I'm assuming a 5-year interval. I can't imagine it's 10. We could always bring that back into the fold.
Sure.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it could be. I'm just suggesting that, especially as we get farther out into trying to make sure more critical parts of the system are in place, and the fact that we will, as Susan said, have a very good low stress on-street corridor on both 84th Street and 90th Street, paralleling the freeway, that it'd be very difficult for that corridor, again, unless it were, say, part of a bond election, that there were enough citizens that thought it was worth investing. I'm going to estimate that corridor in today's dollars would be pushing $15 to $20 million, and possibly higher with where construction costs have gone. So it would be a huge investment, but it can be brought back in a future plan. Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Thank you.
Did you have additional, you said you had 4 questions, I believe.
Nope. That wraps up all my commentary.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Chair Anderson. I kind of, I was going to speak up about that corridor also. So I kind of reverberate Subcommittee Member Davies' concerns about that, that corridor. I think it's a good connection, but I understand the cost and the location makes it probably not viable. Is there a plan to look at alternate routes that would take that over, or do some planning on alternate routes that aren't so dangerous or costly at this time, to parallel that at some time, and then coming in with a plan to publish so the public can see that there is a way to get from point A to point B?
In the next set of, thank you. In the next set of slides, Chair Anderson, we'll be looking at our planned neighborhood bikeways, and I'll show what we have right now that's planned on both sides of the freeway that are the alternate. So those would be those low stress routes Dave was talking about. And then we would continue looking farther north and beyond from there.
Chair, and so I could also add, beyond the neighborhood bikeway alternatives on 84th Street and 90th Street, as you can see on the slide that's on the screen, we are proposing to bring back side path, the majority of which is already constructed on the Hayden Road alignment on the west side, and then on the 92nd, 94th alignment, we have opportunities to add to the east of the freeway. We have opportunities to complete side path, and we have also proposed a active transportation corridor improvement as part of the future list of capital projects that would provide another north-south option, which are both, all these options are ones where we feel we'd have higher usage, because there are multiple ways that you can get in and out of the corridors. And that's one of the biggest challenges when you get into kind of a situation where you've got a freeway wall on one side and property walls for subdivisions on the other side. Is you need to have, if you don't have access points at least a quarter-mile spacing, you're not going to get a lot of usage out of the system. Thank you.
Thank you.
Another quick question. People have asked me, why don't we use the Central Arizona Canal, the CAP Canal, to get around out there? Is it because it has no access? Over?
We do have some areas that exist east of the 101. That's the rest of the CAP Canal is planned, and that path would be on the south side or south of the canal itself, outside the fence. We do have the plans to continue prioritizing that as a local and regional connection. It's just there are some challenges with what space we have available, but the landowner and operator, they're very enthusiastic about adding the paths and trails along the canal as well. We just haven't got there yet. I mean, I think we had 2 or 3 rounds that we tried for some federal funding between Via Linda and Cactus, including an underpass, and it scored kind of in the middle, but didn't make the cut. But we're looking at our next grant opportunity for parts of this corridor as well. And then we have that challenge of crossing the 101, but we did have a design concept completed several years ago for what that might look like as well, so that the freeway wouldn't be a barrier.
If I could add in on that, we, in the CAP corridor, one thing that is different and totally from the Salt River project canals is the Bureau of Reclamation allows no access onto the canal banks. They have reserved an easement on the south side of the canal in most places that could be used for path and trail, but yeah, there is no legal access provided to the canal bank. So that's a huge difference from the SRP system. And that's one of our challenges. And as we look at that CAP corridor, it's really going to be a combination of the CAP/Frank Lloyd Wright corridor for how you lay out and future path improvements, because again, we do have some of those same challenges where you can end up with long stretches of path potentially that are next to a fence on one side and next to walls on the other side, and that can have significant challenges on what type of use you're going to get out of it. So those are some of the things we have to continue to look at, but that corridor is a priority for us. How we actually lay it out from the standpoint of how we think it'll provide the most usage is something we're going to continue to work on. There are significant amounts of side path already in place along Frank Lloyd Wright, which pretty much follows the CAP. But the main message, though, is that we will never have access to the banks of the CAP canal because of the security restrictions that are in place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Susan. I don't see any other hands, questions, so we can proceed on the next section.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Dave, for remembering that I did have these next when I doubted myself. But we are proposing the neighborhood bikeway corridors. This would be a new designation for our bikeways, and it currently has approximately 26 miles that we are proposing. And this is really, again, refining our existing system along our streets and promoting the livable streets. What you see in more communities are the terms low stress routes for a wider range of abilities and ages and bicycle users. This is what we have so far that we have planned. So what we were talking about earlier in lieu of the Pima Path corridor would be this 84th Street as well as 90th. If we overlaid this onto our existing network, that would show the connectivity better, but I also didn't want to lose these in all the lines. But the important thing to note for a neighborhood bikeway, they would be like what we have now for routes, where a route is typically designated if it helps you get to and through a neighborhood. So it would at least be, I want to say, typically 1.5 to 2 miles minimum, and connect to the rest of the network. So if someone does want to get to bike lanes or the different paths. And then on this plan network, we also have what's on the table and circled here is the proposed key routes from the Old Town Bicycle Master Plan. So those, they may end up being called something different since they're not necessarily in a neighborhood, but they'd serve that same purpose. And we're already working on portions to add to 2nd Street. This was one really important one where portions of it already exist. And we have a CIP project for the remainder. And then another important one that connects to and within part of Old Town would be 70th Street Neighborhood Bikeway. That was the first one that we had an actual design concept created recently over the past year and a half. But then again, the idea for these, it doesn't designate whether it's going to be a bike lane option or a shared lane marking only, but they give us flexibility through the neighborhoods along our streets, that it's not just to connect within the neighborhood, but it also is, like Dave was saying earlier, when we have limited access points, that is a big challenge for users. So the neighborhood Bikeway network would help reach more properties, more destinations, and then link to the network.
If I might add as well, on this, Chair Anderson, another part of our thought process with the neighborhood bikeways of creating these low stress options on lower volume streets is that it also becomes an opportunity for some of our younger cyclists to start to get used to what it's like to ride on a street, and make it maybe a little more likely that as they mature that they'll find that some of our options for on-street cycling are something that they're willing to use, because right now, it's a small percentage of cyclists who are comfortable riding on some of our larger, busier streets. Not saying that we'll see a great change there, but this is one way to try to at least get folks a little more comfortable with the idea that the street can be a good option for cycling as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on this section or comments?
I don't see any hands. Anybody? Move along, Susan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now this is Greg's section.
Yes, again, thank you, Chair Anderson and members of the Paths and Trails Subcommittee. This is an important meeting, obviously, because we're talking about the Transportation Action Plan, and Susan has gone over the streets and the paths elements. And this is the trails element that we can talk about. We have a pretty robust system in the city of Scottsdale. We have 150 existing trails, 150 miles of existing trails. And through this process that we're going through with the refinement of our system and the update of the Transportation Master Plan, we're looking at areas where we can do that, actually refine the system. And so what we did, we went through the existing plan network, which was about 188 miles. And as I'd mentioned, we have existing 150 miles. So it's a significantly robust system. It's a pretty citywide. Obviously, this doesn't include any trails within the McDowell Sonoran Preserve, which has 220 miles of trails. The preserve, as you know, is like it's its own entity. And so there's two main objectives with the trail element in our Transportation Action Plan, and that is to enhance the neighborhood trail network as well as have connections that link to the preserve. And that is kind of our intent of our trails element. So with that said, going through the system, I looked at the network, and there were areas that lacked connectivity, obviously, that didn't connect to the existing system or had some redundancy in the network, or there wasn't any existing easement, which I think that's a key point is when we have paths or trails, we need either right-of-way or easements, and it's tricky. There's different types of easements. There's trail easements, there's equestrian easement, there is a public non-motorized access easement, which is the key easement because it inclusive of every user of equestrian or bicyclist or jogger or skateboarder. So that is really the term is a public non-motorized access easement. So where there's no easement, it makes it more difficult to actually build a path or trail. Or there's areas where they're unfeasible. There's terrain issues, as Dave had mentioned, through the rawhide wash. It just is not feasible, and it's just not cost effective. The benefit cost is not there. And so that's what we did when we looked at all these really paths element and trails element. You can go to the next slide. And so obviously we made some adjustments, and this is the central area of the city of Scottsdale. And those segments actually do pertain to what I just spoke on. It just, there is either lack of easement or there seemed to be system redundancy. And as you can see, the far northern line, that's in Wingate, and that does not have a specific easement. And so it's just much easier to hit the low hanging fruit where there's easements available. And that's where we can actually implement a network that can be inclusive within the whole city. I can go next slide. So this is an area in the north. This is part A, I called it. You can see there's significant redundancy in this area that occurs, especially, I would say that's just west of Scottsdale Road. Now, in respect to this whole process, which is very fluid in the update of this plan, and that's why we're here today, just to talk about what we can add or take out or what we need to put back in. And actually yesterday, Susan and I were doing some trail planning, and the area that's between Joe Max and Dixoletta, just and between Scottsdale Road and Pima, yeah, in that area, they actually, there are some existing general land office plat easements, which is another type of easement, which was created by the federal government that allows us to put in trails and as well as paths. And so I actually added in some more mileage because it was an area that we felt, well, that it was conducive to the system and it had good connectivity. Plus there was a resident that has requested some trail network within the area because there are no sidewalks. In northern Scottsdale, you'll see that a lot where there's no sidewalks. And people actually navigate through their neighborhood with a trail system, especially west of Scottsdale Road, like along Pinnacle Vista, all the way to the actual Phoenix boundary. So that is a critical aspect of the trail system to provide something that people can use to navigate through their neighborhood. Hang on. And then on the very bottom of the slide, you'll see the area, the Church Road area, which is that area there. That has been a very contentious area. Those are wash trails as well as a trail down Church Road. We received information years ago that residents really didn't want those. Plus, I believe we are lacking some easements along that area, especially the wash area. So, and then you'll see those two little connections to the preserve. Although those are actually in private developments. Plus, the preserve is very particular where you enter and exit, the ingress and egress. So those are just some examples of why we deleted specific segments. Go to the next slide, please. And then this is the northern area, part B. This is up in Desert Mountain. This is behind, pretty predominantly behind gated entrances. And then the area to the very, very north, that is a very rugged terrain. Plus, we received comments from the HOA in Desert Mountain that they have their own network, that they don't really need any additional trails in that area. And so that was the reason that those segments were identified as deletions from the planned network. Next slide. That kind of sums up our trails element and our adjustments we would like to make. But if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to just, let's talk about it.
This is Chair Anderson. I don't see anybody's hand, but Greg, I got a question about the last slide. Could you bring the last slide up? I'm just curious, the ones up in Desert Mountain, the proposed trails, how did those get in the program in the first place?
Thank you, Chair Anderson and members of the subcommittee. The city of Scottsdale's been in in the trail planning and path planning mode for a long time, since the mid 60s. A lot of these segments that were on our plan system were done years and years ago. And what the planners did is they just looked at areas that they thought were conducive to a trail being constructed. It could have been a wash corridor, it could have been along a specific roadway, but in this case, that's what happened. Those had been on the system for a long, long time. I think in the mid 80s, that is when the trail program really started to ramp up, that we started to look at the city holistically, and then these segments were placed on there. And as Desert Mountain developed, as it has over the years, that has restricted usage in that area. But that's kind of the high level answer.
Thank you, Greg.
If I could just add a little to that too, same with paths. When the previous plans were created for the future network, they didn't look at whether there was already the easements in place, because that does still help during the private development process when the transportation department stipulates to that developer to either dedicate what's needed or dedicate and build that portion. But part of what we've been working with this year with this process is if an area is already developed out and there's not going to be something new coming in, then the chances are really low that we would have that opportunity to tie it to development, or even the individual parcels, if there's a vacant parcel and then they come in for permits or something. That was part of the reason that we've been evaluating that feasibility of ever having that future chance. But if it's along a long vacant section of land or state land that will likely be sold in the future, we've typically kept those in our planned network, if I'm remembering some of our segments. So
Thank you, Susan.
thank you.
I don't see any other questions. I believe we can, does that finish this segment of your presentation?
Yes, thanks,
It
Chair Anderson.
does.
In respect to the trails network, so let me just sum it up. We had 150 miles of existing trails. We had 188 miles of planned trails. So that reduction of right around 48 miles, we're going to have about 140 miles of planned trails. And that's a significant build out time. We're building approximately 2 to 3 miles a year. So we're looking at a 40-year build out to complete the system. So there's a lot of work to do. But with that said, this action plan, we are going to be proactive in building trails every year with our capital trails account, as many miles as we can.
Thank you.
I have one more quick question. The big state land parcels, does the city look at those now and look at potential trail paths? So they have something in place when the state sells those and the developer takes over, or have we already done that? And as you say, they were, some of our trails go way back, to a point where we thought maybe we might need it at some date, and when the developer would come in, and I'm just curious if we've done that in some of those state land parcels.
Thank you, Chair Anderson and members of the subcommittee. Yes, we are doing that. The state land parcels, there's obviously a lot of those parcels existing right now, and it's in the northern area of Scottsdale. Prime examples would be Wallapai Drive, which is surrounded by state land. That's a project we're undertaking right now of extending Wallapai Drive from Pima to Hayden, and then including, those are planned trails and path or side paths along Wallapai. Also, there's a parcel that is off of Joe Max that connects in the preserve, and it's state land. And I have a link that goes right in the preserve. So we're just waiting for those state land parcels to be auctioned off. Once they're auctioned off and the developer purchases those properties, and then they entitle the properties for housing, predominantly in this area, single family homes, then we stipulate our path and trails and those locations, I would say almost all those locations have planned paths and trails.
Thank you. That's good to know.
And then one reason we don't typically do it sooner is the state land department does not give easements away. I mean, it doesn't benefit them. We do have one east of Pinnacle Peak Park where at the time we purchased that the easement when we acquired it. But as Greg said, we normally wait and tie that to private development so that we can use our funding for more improvements in other places.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
I think we're good. Move on. And we're moving on to item number 4, guidelines to identify pedestrian crossing treatments. Kiran?
Good morning. Good morning, members of the committee. Again, I'm trying to share my screen. Give me 1 second. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see it now. Thank you.
Again, good morning. This is Kiran Guntupalli, Principal Traffic Engineer with the City of Scottsdale. Today, I'll be presenting on city's guidelines to identify pedestrian crossing treatments. This document helps us in uniform analysis and recommending countermeasures at pedestrian crossings. The background on why this document was developed is because we receive a number of requests from our citizens on requesting pedestrian crossings be installed at various locations. And as part of our job here, we want to make sure that our facilities are safe for pedestrians, and this document again gives us a platform for analyzing to look at these locations and provide uniformity in providing pedestrian crossings, and also deploy improve transportation network to improve transportation network for pedestrians. This document establishes an evaluation procedure and also prioritizes the method that benefit the installation of a new pedestrian crossing. And this comes with also engineering judgment. Not all countermeasures are uniformly applied at all locations. So the countermeasures come with the engineering judgment and also countermeasure identification. These guidelines were developed. We took into account our past experience in developing these countermeasures. And we also referenced other documents and studies. We referenced Federal Highway Administration's Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian as a resource. And we also looked at Arizona Department of Transportation's Pedestrian Hybrid Beacon evaluation sheet in developing these procedures. And also an important document that is considered as a Bible for all traffic engineers, Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, was used in developing these guidelines. We also identified about 20 study locations and used these guidelines to basically refine on how this document would work in our system. So we did use these guidelines in analyzing a set of locations to make sure that our countermeasures identified meets our city's expectations. The evaluation procedure starts with identifying the location. This is the first step where we collect all the information that's relevant to the location. Then the second step is collecting data. We basically look at the pedestrian volumes, the vehicular volumes, and also observe what's happening at this location, and then perform an evaluation to recommend an appropriate countermeasure. We look at various items or list of things when we are recommending, when we are doing this evaluation. The first thing is origin and destination. We look at where the pedestrians are coming from and where they're going to. We look at the volume of these pedestrians and the vehicular volumes. We basically look at how busy the street is. If the vehicular volume is very heavy and it's difficult for pedestrians to find gaps, that's something that we look at and consider while evaluating these countermeasures. We also look at the nearest defined crossing. What a defined crossing is if there's a traffic signal at a nearby location, or if there's a controlled crossing at a nearby location, how far this controlled crossing is something that we look at. We also look at the posted speed limit. If it's a high-speed facility, we look at a different countermeasure to if it's a low stress or a low speed facility. And we also look at the pedestrian crossing distance. If it's a major arterial with a 7-lane cross section, we look at splitting out constructing a refuge in the middle to basically split the crossing distance. We look at the type of median that's available, the roadway illumination. Last but not the least, the collision history, if there's a past history of any pedestrian or related collisions. And side distance is something that we don't want to be installing these countermeasures in curves. So we also make sure that there's enough side distance where this pedestrian crossings are installed. And after, based on these, all these items, there's an evaluation or a scoring sheet that's developed that the scoring sheet is developed based on cities past. Again, I just want to go back and say that this is not just a random sheet that we generated. This sheet was developed based on our past experience on various pedestrian studies that we conducted. And also we refer to the national standards and other resources. We look for a minimum score of 30 points to have a more controlled crossing. We call it controlled crossing when we install a rectangular rapid flashing beacon or a pedestrian hybrid beacon or a traffic signal, which I'll go into more detail later in the presentation. And countermeasures are selected again based on engineering judgment after this scoring sheet is completed. The document identifies the various types of pedestrian crossing treatments that are typically applied in City of Scottsdale. And again, I want to stress and reiterate that these countermeasures are recommended based on engineering judgment and site characteristics. Again, I'll go into detail on what these type of treatments are. The first one to be considered is a high visibility marked crosswalk. This is typically considered at low speed facilities where the traffic volumes are really low and the crossing distance is also less than 50 feet. The typical cost element that's identified here is an approximate cost, and these costs vary depending on the site and also the raw material. This document was generated about a year ago. The costs that are coming up now are typically way higher than what's listed in this document. So I just want to start with that note. The other type of countermeasure that's been used is in-pavement signage. Again, this is applied where there's typically a higher traffic volume than a high visibility crosswalk is applied. Again, something to note with these type of signage, in-pavement signage, is that they get hit pretty frequently, and there's a lot of ongoing maintenance cost that's involved with these type of treatment. Again, the other type of countermeasure that is observed in Scottsdale is a raised crosswalk. These are typically installed on a low speed facility, and these raised crosswalk also act as a neighborhood traffic mitigation measure where traffic typically slows down approaching these raised crosswalks. Again, the typical cost of this is about $8,000. Again, to make it more obvious, sometimes we also include high visibility crosswalks and in pavement signage to go along with this raised crosswalks. The next type of countermeasure is a bulb out or curb extension. This is again applied at a low speed facilities as well. And what this does is this reduces the crossing distance for pedestrians to cross the street, and is typically used where there is a heavy pedestrian activity more in an urban environment. The typical cost of installation of such a countermeasure is around $15,000 per extension. Unmarked pedestrian refuge. This is typically applied on, I would say about on a facility with 30 to 45 mile per hour facilities with medium to high traffic volumes, and not as much of pedestrian volumes. This helps in reducing the pedestrian crossing distance and provides a refuge for pedestrians to stop and observe traffic before crossing. The typical cost of installation is about $30,000. This is mostly because of the cost of providing ADA ramps at either ends along with the medians. The next items are more of a traffic control devices that are deployed in the street. This one is called a rectangular rapid flashing beacon. These are installed on facilities that are posted, the facilities that are with a posted speed of 30 to 35 miles an hour and traffic volumes of between 9,000 to 15,000 ADT. Often used where yield or compliance is an issue. And if the crosswalks or crossing distance is huge, we typically add a pedestrian refuge. And typical cost of this installation is around $20,000 to $25,000. And this is a more of a pedestrian hybrid beacon is a more controlled crossing. And these are used in where there's heavy pedestrian volumes, and also where the posted speed limit is between 30 to 50 miles per hour, and traffic volumes are more than 12,000 ADT. Typically applied on mostly on major collectors or arterial type facilities. And there is a MUTCD guidance on how or where these need to be applied. And this is a traffic device that assigns a right of way. So vehicles are typically required to stop when these type of traffic control device is installed. And the average cost of this installation is coming up to around $250,000. Again, the cost is the typical cost, depending on where these are installed and other facilities that are around this facility, around this installation, the cost may be higher. The next type of traffic control device that's typically used for pedestrian crossings is a traffic signal. MUTCD or manual on uniform traffic control devices provides a typical warrant analysis for deploying a traffic signal, warranting a pedestrian traffic signal. Again, the cost of a traffic signal is anywhere between $275 to the recent cost that I've seen is about $500,000 for a traffic signal. Last but not the least is a grade separated pedestrian crossing. This is what we call a Cadillac of pedestrian crossing, where the traffic where the pedestrian crossings are typically very high. It's used at multi-use path crossings, and cost varies a lot bit from $600,000 to a $6 million facility, depending on where they are located. With that, I'm happy to answer the questions.
Thank you. Very informative. Let's see, does anybody have questions on the subcommittee? I don't see any hands. I have one
Yes, sir.
potentially. When you go back to your pedestrian crossing evaluation,
Yes, sir.
I think you said that it typically takes 30 points must be achieved. That kind of indicates to me that you need to have at least 2, 3, or 4 of the items, met before you'll consider, changing the crossing.
Look for
That's true?
Commissioner Anderson and members of the committee. We look for 30 points to identify a higher level of crossing treatment, that is a rectangular rapid flashing beacon or a pedestrian hybrid beacon. For a local street with less number of crossings, we typically use what you call unmarked crossing, which don't require, if we see a level of pedestrian activity, but not rises to a significant number of crossings, we do treat with some kind of a treatment, either unmarked crossing or a marked crossing, depending on type of facility. But the higher 30 points are required typically for a higher level of treatment.
So what you're saying, and I agree, is that some of these lesser treatments, you don't need 30 points to warrant it, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to hear. Okay. Anybody else have any questions? We have one committee member have a hand up.
Yes, this is Ted Levy. Just a quick question. This is more of a, just to understand the terminology. If you go back to the example of I think it was called the pedestrian hybrid beacon. Is that what we also I've heard referred to as like a hawk light or
Exactly.
hawk lighting?
Exactly.
Okay.
Pedestrian hybrid beacon is more of a MUTCD terminology, and hawk is a commonly used term. The reason why it's called a hawk is a traffic control device that's developed in Tucson by one of our well-known researcher called Richard Nassy, and he named it hawk. But when it got moved into MUTCD, it's called a pedestrian hybrid beacon.
Okay, got you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any more. Well, thank you, Kiran, for the presentation. Let's move on to the next item on the list. Is basically other transportation projects.
Thank you. I just have a few. Pull it up here. Let me make sure I opened it. Hold on 1 second. Is that share? Are you able to see that, or did I not share?
Not yet.
Okay, let me come back. Sorry about that. This one? Okay.
That's it.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience. I had too many presentations open, but not the one that we needed.
Good.
So just some quick update for everyone. The Old Town Bicycle Master Plan is almost finished. There were stakeholder focus group meetings that were held back in April and May to gather more input. We will probably put a summary or a short presentation on the project webpage when the project is all wrapped up. And then this month, on August 24th, Mark will be giving City Council an overview of the master plan. McDowell Road bike lanes, Greg's project.
Yeah, this is Greg Davies. The McDowell Road Bike Lane project is 40% complete. It's under construction at this point in time. And we'll be adding bike lanes continuously from 64th Street all the way to Pima Road. There are some segments that have bicycle lanes already. So far, so good. So that's where that project's at.
And then I didn't make a slide for Osborne, but Greg's also working on the Osborne Road project.
The Osborne Road Complete Street project is at 100% design. That is a project from Hayden to Scottsdale Road that'll include a roundabout at Miller Road. That project will go to construction hopefully in the fall of 2021. It'll be phased, and the first phase will be the roundabout at Miller and Osborne.
Thank you. Our pathway finding signage. So this design was complete back in 2016. It can be replicated citywide, but the study area was McKellips up to Indian Bend Road. And we're currently working on taking this back to Design Development Review Board just because so much time has passed, but we're awaiting that meeting. And we hope to present a very brief overview of this at the August Transportation Commission meeting. And this will have directional signage, path identification. It'll identify when you're crossing at a bridge or underpass so that you know what that cross street is, and other sign types. And we're holding off on adding from McKellips to Thomas Road on Indian Bend Wash because those will be added when the Parks Master Plan is implemented. Right now, they're just going to be doing smaller improvements in those parks, but when they implement their full master plan, we'll include the signage. Mountain View sidewalk is currently underway. This is on the north side of Mountain View from just east of Indian Bend Wash over to Arabian Trail. And this is across from Cochise Elementary School and Mountain View Park. And there's sidewalk otherwise, but this is a gap project. And this will also include a bus stop where I added that little green dot, and then an eastbound left turn bay at 84th Street. And school is starting tomorrow, so they'll be doing what they can, but there's a school crossing there at 84th Street and Mountain View. And then a few years ago, bike lanes were added in this area. So this is a very active area for all modes. And we're just glad to be able to add this sidewalk. Thomas Road sidewalk, this is a much smaller gap project that we had to put on hold last summer when it was ready to go. We just had issues to work out with SRP, but this is where the frontage road begins. So this is east of Hayden Road, but currently people walking on the sidewalk would have to almost walk through this little area and connect to the remaining sidewalk next to an alley, but that's not really accessible for people with disabilities. So on the landscaped median, we will add new sidewalk and a ramp. And then from there, pedestrians could connect across the frontage road to the remaining sidewalk. And this is also where several years ago during pavement maintenance, we did stripe bike lanes, but in this area, we did not have room to continue the eastbound bike lane. So this is where the route gives people information that they can come to the frontage road. And then as they continue east from there, eastbound, there are curb cuts to help people continue through and cross until they get closer to Pima Road. So that project, I don't have a start date yet, but we're moving forward on that soon. Oh, actually, I do have a start date, August 16th, and it'll take 1 week. And then Dynamite Bike Lanes, City Council approved the construction contract on July 1st. We're very excited about this project. It will finish the remaining bike lanes through really from Pima to 136th Street. And it does include right turn lanes at several intersections through this area, but these are the last gaps in the bike lanes between Pima and 136th Street. And I think that's it. Does anybody have questions?
I don't see any hands. Thank you, Susan.
Great, thank you.
Subcommittee identification, item number 6, subcommittee identification of future agenda items. Does anybody on the subcommittee have some input or a request for some future items to be presented?
And I apologize, I accidentally removed the August 19th Transportation Commission regular meeting off the top of this in case anyone's been looking at that. But at that meeting, Karan will give this same pedestrian crossing guidelines update, and Dave will give an arterial life cycle program update, and then I will fit in a very short wayfinding signage update at that meeting. Everything else on here, I believe, is current. And then I can jump down to our Paths and Trails Subcommittee October meeting. We should have a bicycle and related devices and e-scooters update for you by then with our revised proposed regulations and possibly a civic center renovation. It should be under construction around that time, but we'll be able to give you more information because I think subcommittee member Davis had asked for us to add something for that. But if you have other possible items, please let us know.
Okay. Okay. I think that wraps it up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful presentations from the staff, Susan and Greg. Appreciate it. On that basis, I'll take a motion for adjournment.
This is Subcommittee Member Davis. So moved.
Can I have a second?
Said Levy, second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Nobody's opposed. So
Thank you.
we are now concluding this meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.